Good morning, friends. In both Sunday's message and yesterday's devotion, we saw that one of the things that made the Canaanite woman's faith so great was the persistence of her faith. Even though Jesus appeared to ignore her at first, she continued trusting in him, knowing full well that he had the power to heal her daughter. And even when Jesus did speak and seemed again to offer resistance to the idea of helping her, she continued to seek that help according to the knowledge of God's grace and promise. And according to all this, or rather considering all this, I mentioned that Jesus had actually taught elsewhere about such persistence. And I believe in Sunday's message, I actually said this next part incorrectly. So I want to fix that now, because I said that Jesus taught about persistence in the parable of the impertinent widow. But actually, impertinent is very much the wrong word, because if someone is impertinent, it means they are rude and not showing respect. And that, of course, is not the point of the parable, not what Jesus is teaching at all. Rather, it was the parable of the importunate widow. Importunate, very similar sounding words, but quite different meanings, because the widow being importunate does not mean that she was rude or lacking respect, but simply that she was persistent. So I'm not saying that a great faith is one who is persistent or persistent in a rude way. Not at all. Just like the Canaanite woman, we persist in faith. We're supposed to persist in faith, but we do so with full reverence and submission to the very God in whom we have that faith. But in order to consider the very idea of us persisting in faith a bit more, let's go to that parable of the importunate widow and read what it's all about. This parable is found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18, the first 8 verses, and this is what we read. And Jesus told them a parable to the effect that they ought to always pray and not lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, give me justice against my adversary. For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice, so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Now, what we have here essentially is what is called an argument from the lesser to the greater, because Jesus describes an earthly judge, a sinful judge, who of course is less than God himself, who is the ultimate judge. And this earthly judge, this lesser judge, is a sinful judge who does not actually care about justice. He doesn't care for the sake of God. He does not care for the sake of men. He's an unjust judge. But the widow in the parable is persistent in her request so that he does see justice done on her behalf, because eventually he says that he just, for the simple fact that she just keeps on coming, he will actually make sure that justice is done. And so Jesus uses this logical argument here from the lesser to the greater to say that even if this lesser unjust judge will do what is right because of the persistence of those who seek what is right, how much more so will God, who is himself so much better and greater than that sinful judge, how much more will God make sure that righteousness and justice is done for his people? Therefore, the whole point, as Luke tells us in the narrative in verse 1, the point that Jesus is making is that we ought to always pray and not lose heart. We ought to pray with a faith in a Lord that persists. Even if it seems like the Lord is not responding at first, we must persist. Because in this parable, the unjust judge didn't respond right away, and so the widow remained persistent. And actually, to all exterior observances, Jesus didn't respond right away to the Canaanite woman either, did he? Yet in both cases, both women persisted until the right blessing was given. And Jesus is teaching us again, in both cases, that this is what our faith ought to be like. Now, one very important point of clarification. The lesson here is not simply that if you want something bad enough, you want to get something, have something happen, or whatever, then just keep praying until you get it. This is not telling us how we can leverage God or obligate God to give us the sinful or earthly thing that we might desire. Because, number one, consider the widow from the parable. What's she looking for? What was she desiring? What was she persistent in asking for? Justice. And we don't know what the particular case was. We don't know the situation between her and her adversary, and we don't need to know those particulars. All we need to know is that she was looking for justice. She was looking to have what was right done. And that's why Jesus concludes by saying, "And will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night?" Because justice is in the will of God. Again, we have this idea that when Jesus says, "Ask and it will be given, seek and you will find, knock and it shall be opened," all of that is in the context of asking, seeking, and knocking in his name. Or in other words, in alignment with his will. For if what we're asking for is not in keeping with his will, we shouldn't consider any of this to be a promise that we will still receive it. Because as we've mentioned before, God only gives good gifts to his people. And so if we're asking for something that actually and ultimately is not good for us, then it doesn't matter how earnestly or persistently we ask for it, he's not going to give it to us. But concerning the things that are according to his will, then those things are what we ought to seek, and yes, seek persistently, faithfully, in the knowledge that according to God's perfect timing, he will bestow them upon us. And that persistence in seeking God's will is, of course, a huge part of what makes our faith strong, great, and proven to be genuine. Because by its very nature, this persistent faith endures over time, which means it is us submitting to God and relying upon God over time, consistently, constantly, moment by moment. And not only does that, yes, yield a blessing for us, but more importantly, that constant and enduring faith and persistence in trusting in him brings glory to God. It brings glory to God when God's creatures, and particularly his covenant people, rely upon him completely as the God of the universe, the one who created them and redeemed them. So, friend, consider your own faith. Do you trust in the Lord? Do you have faith in the Lord? How persistent, how continual, how constant is it? In terms of the way that it comes out, the way that you express it and you live it. Because if it has hiccups, okay, which doesn't mean you're not saved. We are saved by the grace of God, not by the amount of faith we drum up in ourselves. Because as we talked about yesterday briefly, we can't drum up any faith in ourselves. It's a gift from God. But in the process of sanctification, in the process of living out that faith, we need to strive to look to the Lord more consistently. And so if you see those gaps, you see those hiccups, you see the times that, I know I believe in Jesus and I do have faith, but there's sometimes when it's just really weak, the valleys and the troughs and mountaintops, and it comes crashing back down. If you recognize that in yourself, ask the Lord for strength. And then according to that strength, strive day by day. And yes, moment by moment. And I mean that literally. Moment by moment each day to rely upon him fully and in everything. Seek his will rather than your own and submit to him in reverence continually. And with that, I pray you have a good and godly day. And Lord willing, I'll see you soon.